Hi, fourth graders. Welcome to day 2 of our read aloud about the Revolutionary War. We left off yesterday with the Boston Tea Party, where colonists threw tea into the water because they were angry with the tax. Chapter 2. The War Begins. In 1774, Parliament began passing a series of laws that came to be known as the Intolerable Acts. These acts were designed to punish Massachusetts for destroying millions of dollars worth of property. Parliament then ordered Boston Harbor to be closed until the colonists paid for the tea they had destroyed. British General Thomas Gage was named governor of Massachusetts. It became illegal for the colonists to hold town meetings or elect their own officials without permission from the British. The Administration of Justice Act required that any British officials charged with murder be tried for their crimes in England rather than in the colonies. The colonists saw this as a way to legalize any murders committed by British soldiers in the colonies. The acts also saw the return of an unpopular law that allowed British officials to house their troops in colonist homes. We can see here that the different soldiers that are over from Britain have a lot of power in the American colonies. The First Continental Congress. On September 5, 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia to discuss what should be done in response to the Intolerable Acts. These men called themselves the Continental Congress. They decided that each of the colonies would be given a single vote in all decisions. They agreed that the colonies should be free from any taxes for which they did not vote. They also agreed that the British military should not be allowed in the colonies without American permission. They created a document that stated what they believed their rights should be. Among these were the right to hold meetings, the right to a fair trial by jury, that means to have a jury that's judged by your own peers, and the right to own property. The Congress sent the document to King George III in hopes that the British government would agree to the demands. The Continental Congress agreed to stop importing goods from British merchants until the demands were met. They also agreed to stop exporting their own products to the British if the demands were still not met within a year. I want you to pause real quick and read the caption box, a first-hand look at the plan of the Union. Great, let's keep reading on. Spies and militias. Local militias, that means little groups of soldiers or armies, had existed since the earliest days of the colonies. Many militiamen had fought in the French and Indian War. They began to gather ammunition and other supplies in preparation for conflict with Britain. Many militiamen were not interested in making peace with Great Britain. In Massachusetts, a network of spies formed under the leadership of Samuel Adams. I want you thinking, as we keep reading about these spies, of what do you think is going to happen next? Do you think that King George III will agree with their demands, or do you think he will refuse them? The group was formed with Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere. Revere organized a group whose purpose was to keep an eye on the activities of General Gage. In April 1775, spies learned that Gage was planning an attack against the rebels. His troop would march towards Lexington, just 12 miles, 19 kilometers northwest of Boston. They planned to arrest Adams and Hancock for treason. Treason means that you're going against your home country. The troops would then head west to the town of Concord, where militia groups had secretly been storing supplies. The Battle of Lexington. Thanks to information from Revere's spy network, the men at Concord hid or destroyed their supplies. They were ready for the British on April 18th. Revere learned that Gage's troops would begin their march later that night. Revere and his men took no chances in making sure their warning reached Lexington and Concord. He and a friend each set out on horseback towards Lexington. 3 other men climbed to the top of a tall church tower and used lanterns to signal riders in the nearby town of Charleston. The riders alerted other colonists that the British were coming. The next morning, 700 British soldiers arrived at Lexington and commanded the 77 waiting militiamen to throw down their weapons. The militiamen refused. A shot was fired. It's not clear who fired the first shot. It was likely a colonist shooting from behind a fence. The British returned fire and charged. These were the first shots fired. I want you to pause right now and read Spotlight on Samuel Adams. Great, let's see what happens after these first shots were fired. These were the first shots fired in the American Revolutionary War. 8 militiamen were killed. 9 others were wounded. The Battle of Concord. The British marched toward Concord. They still hoped to find and destroy the Americans' hidden weapons. The Concord militia waited for the British across a bridge just north of the town. As the British forces began searching the town, militias from the surrounding areas arrived to join up with their conquered allies. The British found ammunition and wooden gun carriages. The carriages were frames on which large guns were mounted to be fired. The British tried to burn the carriages, but they accidentally set the town courthouse on fire. The militiamen saw the fire and began marching over the bridge into the town. British troops fired warning shots, but the Americans refused to back down. British troops soon began firing at militiamen. The British met with significant resistance from the colonists at Concord. So you can see here that the tension is getting really high between the colonists and these men in the militia versus the Great Britain soldiers. The American troops outnumbered the British and were able to drive them back quickly. But the British forces met resistance as they retreated from Concord. Hundreds of militiamen from as far away as New Hampshire had positioned themselves along the roads back to Boston. They hid on hilltops, behind trees, and in barns. The British had no way to defend themselves against the style of fighting. They quickly marched back to Charlestown. The victories of Lexington and Concord inspired militias from around the colonies to begin marching toward Boston. Soon, about 15,000 American troops surrounded the city. Gage and 6,500 British soldiers were trapped. After reading this, do you think that the American colonists are gaining confidence and thinking that maybe they'll be able to defeat the British, or do you think that they're losing hope? I want you to pause and think about that question and get ready to tell your teacher this week. Also, read yesterday's headlines while your video is paused. Tomorrow, we're going to read The Fight for Freedom and continue learning about the American Revolutionary War.